So Emperor Elwin here has a 4-tank box. The 4-tank box has become a lot stronger than it used to be because there have been numerous buffs to older tanks, for example new troops for a lot of them, SP class for Freya, and also indirect buffs like Legion of Glory becoming a lot stronger, which indirectly buffs Laden. The luxury of a 4-tank box is that you get to pick a DPS first and still have a tank no matter what you do. And that's exactly what he does. He first picks Yulia. Yulia's still a pretty good tank buster, and perhaps more importantly a guard blocker. So even though this is an infantry Yulia, it's still very threatening because Yulia doesn't actually need to kill Landius or anything. Of course more Landius now do tend to be Lancer Landius, so that's what makes first pick Yulia kind of nice. Even in the cases where he runs into a Cav Landius like he is versus me, he can still take his time, try to lock me down. So there are a few ways you can ban against a 4-tank box. You can either start by banning a tank and then ban the other 2 tanks to force the 1 tank that you are not scared of. Or you can do what I did here, which is do a 2-tank ban as the second ban. So basically it's just threatening to get rid of all his tanks. Generally speaking, this does work because if somebody goes to the trouble of making a 4-tank box, they probably prefer playing a safer tank game. So he picks Bolzol into my Liana. As I've mentioned before, picking Bolzol into Liana still works pretty well because debuff characters in general can overload the cleanser characters a lot easier. And of course he also brought Sleep on Bolzol, which is a very good check to Juggler. If I dare to jump in with Juggler, he can just sleep him. Not only might that leave him completely helpless, but it also dispels 3 buffs, which might just invalidate the entire point I bring Juggler in cases like this in the first place. And for that reason, for this particular match, I went with a very risky skill setup. Instead of bringing Beast Shock on Juggler, I instead brought Master of Ice with his 3-cost skill. I also brought Matthew's 3-cost skill. And finally I brought a couple AoE spells on Almeda. So this kind of setup is something I actually used a little bit more of a season or 2 ago. And the reason I don't really use it anymore is because, well, pretty much because of power creep. With Rose and Seal around, it's very difficult for me to pick ban in a way so that Almeda's mixed role can be taken advantage of. Sort of an extension of this is that Rose and Seal has kind of nerfed characters who do minor debuffs or they rely on one specific very strong debuff. It's kind of like how when they created Bracer Emblem, they kind of nerfed the more minor fixed damage characters, for example Kurama or Freya. And that's actually one of the problems I have with the way they've evolved the game. When you create characters that are very, very hard counters to a specific playstyle, like for example Rosensteel versus debuffs, you make it so that if you want to run debuffs at all, you have to use those specific, very strong debuff characters. Or you have to model your entire box around doing debuffs. And of course in that case you first ban Rosensteel. So basically what I'm getting at is when you create characters like that, you sort of screw over interesting hybrid characters like Almeda. Almeda is a character who has a mix of debuffs, heals, cleanses, and even buff dispels, but she's just kind of mediocre at all of them. It was the combination of all these things at once that made her kind of an interesting character to play around with sometimes. But I guess I should actually get to how that's relevant to this particular match. So after multiple turns of us just dancing around each other, my goal here was quite simple. I brought Almeda's 2 Dispelling spells, which is Ultimate Quip and Dragon Blow. Each one dispels 1 buff, and I also have my Almeda equipped with the Badar's Rose. My goal here is to dispel 1 specific buff on Yulia, and that is her Gospel debuff immunity. You could see that when Emperor Elwin wanted to refresh the Gospel on his Yulia, he actually overrode it when he still had a turn left, because like I said, it was clear that he immediately knew what my strategy was. Anyway, in this case, luck was a bit on my side, and I win the standoff. I dispel his immunity and immediately go in with Matthew's 3-cost skill, which allows me to sword dance his Yulia and try to open her up to a KO from Master of Ice from Juggler. While he survives the 3-cost skill, he makes the attempt to heal himself up using Discipline. He actually attacks from melee range, which is a big mistake in this case. I'm guessing it's because in this case he really wanted to stay under guard in Landius, but unfortunately that gets his Yulia killed, and that really was the key target I wanted to get rid of. Now, I know some of you might be wondering, this seems like a very RNG strategy, and to a degree it is, but the important thing here is that I denied him a faction buff for his Yulia by banning Laden second. By doing that, I forced him into bringing the individual buffs like Gospel and Healing Light from Tiaras. Since Almeda could dispel up to 4 buffs, with a 50% chance each time she casted for a second dispel on Yulia, if you actually ran the odds, they're actually slightly in my favor. So, this is a risky strategy for sure, but it's not like a YOLO, only 10% chance of success sort of thing.